Adaptive art considerations and methods for intellectual deficits. This is a broad term, and it does not define one specific diagnosis. Intellectual deficits are wide-ranging from severe cognitive conditions to attention deficits. Included are Down syndrome, fetal alcohol syndrome, Prader-Willi syndrome, congenital rubella syndrome, Williams syndrome, and Fragile X syndrome, along with autism. The deficit can range from mild to severe. Intellectual deficits affect a student's ability to learn, problem solve, and make decisions. They interfere with a person's capacity to perceive or understand information, which affects how they learn and engage in daily activities. And typically, a person would be characterized with an intellectual disability if their IQ is below 70, whereas the average IQ is 100. Intellectual deficits include a decreased level of both cognitive and adaptive abilities. This includes communication and speech delays, delays in processing information, and day-to-day skills. Suggested adaptations for art. To adapt for art making with students with intellectual disabilities, simplify for success. In order for the student to succeed, the teacher must create adaptations. Modifications should simplify to remove stumbling blocks. Accessibility and ease of use allows for better control and results. Students with intellectual disabilities will often be assisted in their classes by a paraprofessional. It's really important to involve the paraprofessional. They spend all day with these students and know them best. And collaborate with them and discuss your lesson objectives and techniques with them so that they understand your adaptations. Let them know how much assistance you want them to give the student to ensure the student has a meaningful experience and is actively involved in creating their own artwork. Adaptations may be made to lessons, tools, and/or materials. Adaptations for art lessons. Teach in a concrete step-by-step manner. Repetition and reinforcement are essential here. Chunk information and explain only 1 or 2 steps at a time to make it more manageable. Also, model the steps. Provide visual step-by-step handouts or samples of each step of the task. Engage the student during the lesson. Incorporate interactive whiteboards or computers. You could also simplify the process. And if necessary, you could do some of the steps for the student. You could also do hand over hand. So that's the student participating, but you helping with some steps of the process. Adaptations for standards. It's important to select appropriate standards for the individual student. This may require matching to a standard at a lower grade level that's more suitable to the student's ability. It's also important to challenge and scaffold the student to climb to the next level, but also be aware not to overwhelm the student with a challenge that they just can't attain, or devalue the student's ability by selecting a standard that's not challenging enough. Adaptations for creating and art making. Adapting media includes isolating and simplifying media and materials. Limit items to only those used for each step to avoid confusion. For example, have only scissors on the table for cutting and then replace them with the paint for the painting step. Give choice, but allow a smaller selection. Instead of a palette of 16 paints, provide just a selection of 3 paints. Adaptations for painting include using larger tempera cakes or watercolor cakes. They're easier to use than the small oval pans, and have students work with just one color at a time. Also keep the colors separated to avoid unwanted color mixing. Also stencils or outlines to isolate areas either to be painted or to be avoided. And painting on acetate over drawing paper is another technique that would give students practice with painting line and practicing their brushwork while also making choices about color and having a different sort of sensory experience. Adaptations for weaving include color coding the warp and also using a felt fabric or foam instead of paper. They're more durable and are less frustrating because they don't tear as paper does. Adaptations for clay include using an alternative material such as Model Magic for fewer steps. There's no scoring or slip required here, so it simplifies things for the students. Also providing laminated templates so students can more easily cut out shapes. Adaptations for printmaking provide everyday objects to print with. Students can experience the process of inking up an object and creating pattern and repetition where they might not be able to carve into a linoleum block using everyday objects like utensils or even fruits or vegetables to create different repetitive stamps or adaptations here. For collage, drawing a light pencil line for glue for the students to follow, and using a visible purple glue stick so students know where they've applied glue are both adaptations for collage. Adapting process and tools. The process of making art is more important than the end result. It's important to experiment with what works best for the individual student. So to facilitate independence, you could use tracers to make drawing specific objects more manageable, use light tables and slant boards to assist in drawing skills, secure artwork and tracers to work surface to prevent movement. You could use clamps, tape, or poster tack. Encourage the use of a helper during handwork. This would be a peer or adult with a free hand. Also, add sensory components to heighten interest and enjoyment. Incorporate touch, smell, sight, and sounds. Include drawing on textured surfaces to engage senses and create awareness. Use fun scissors to create wavy lines and interesting details. You could use paper crimpers to engage sense of touch and texture. And also eliminate sensory triggers if this is an issue for your particular student. Provide varied tools to meet the needs of all students. Brushes could be traditional brushes as well as egg-handled brushes or shaving cream brushes. Also allow extra time for students to focus on a specific task. Frequent breaks would help them to avoid frustration and fatigue. Breaking the process down to several short-term goals instead of one big goal, and also using incentives to make tasks more manageable. Adaptations for presenting. Presenting artwork provides learners with the opportunity to select, analyze, and share their work with the community. Offer guidance and modifications as necessary. You could provide concrete examples for students of what they should select from a portfolio, so providing a sample, or working with the student to create a sampler of the theme to create a fresh visual connection. Also involving the student as a guest artist or featured artist, so they get to select the medium that they prefer for an exhibition of their work and their peers. Also, they become the star of the show here, which is really important for students to be able to make these connections with their peers because they do realize that their product is often very different from those of their peers. Adaptations for responding. Questions and answers that involve complex reasoning can be very challenging for students with intellectual disabilities. They often have trouble communicating, and their chronological age may not align with their cognitive and behavioral age. So, including activities with varied learning goals and levels that appropriately challenge the students will help them move towards success without feeling overwhelmed. Implementing alternative ways for students to respond. If needed, you could provide visual nonverbal ways to respond because communication is often a challenge for these students. So that could include faces with different emotions that they could hold up or point to when responding to artwork, or standing up or sitting down to answer yes or no questions. Adaptations for connecting. Connections to art enhance children's understanding of themselves and others. But children with intellectual disabilities often have challenges understanding abstract concepts. So it's important to consider images that show relatable topics, exciting textures, and universal themes in order for these students to make connections. Also use tiered learning. So break down a topic into a range of complexity for all of your students. So that can involve students at all levels and with all different abilities. Create varied entry points through which students can connect to the lesson. This helps to engage all students with the same artwork and ideas from different levels of intellectual challenge. When you're facilitating discussions, the teacher should be guiding through questions that lead to discovery. And again, this can be levelized based on the student's ability. Discussions can be complicated for students with intellectual disabilities. So you can incorporate visuals for making personal connections, also using game-like strategies, including flashcards and flags with images. Flags, for example, could say same or different. These are some adaptations you could use for your students. Adaptations for meeting standards. There are many adaptations to help students with intellectual disabilities in the creation of artwork. And for me, the process of creating is more valuable than the product. However, one method that especially interested me was related to presenting artwork. Presenting can include the finished product, or it can include the process, or both. But it gives students the opportunity to connect with a broader community, something that can often be particularly challenging for students with intellectual disabilities. So, to meet the Illinois Visual Arts Anchor Standard 4, which is selecting, analyzing, and interpreting artistic work for presentation, and to help students to understand that artists and other presenters consider various techniques, methods, venues, and criteria when analyzing, selecting, and curating objects, artifacts, and artwork for preservation and presentation, and for them to answer the questions: how are artworks cared for and by whom? What criteria, methods, and processes are used to select work for presentation and preservation? And why do people value objects, artifacts, and artworks and select them for presentation? The adaptive method that I choose would be involving the student with the disability as the featured artist or guest artist or curator for a class or school exhibition. And this would help the student with intellectual disabilities be successful in understanding and answering these essential questions related to the standard as they are scaffolded through the process in a way that is effective for them. The options include working with the student to give them control as a curator, to define the theme of the exhibition based upon a favorite method or medium, or incorporating a specific artwork that is meaningful to them. Also, featuring the student with the disability and normalizing their specific interests by incorporating them into the presentation makes me think back to the example of the autistic student whose special interest was the Mo Willems pigeon character, and what a successful result the student had in connecting with their peers and being part of the classroom when their teacher elevated the student's interest rather than trying to suppress it. Adaptations for students with intellectual disabilities can have benefits for all students. Teaching step by step will help all students. The concrete and sequential framework will help all learners more fully understand the lessons and concepts. Concrete examples engage all 5 senses to register information. All students learn and acquire information differently, so this is beneficial to everyone. Sequential presentation orders information in a linear way, and repeating steps and directions or breaking down information lessens confusion and benefits all.